Hello and welcome to Module 2, Chapter 7.2. In this presentation, we will explore the key decisions that need to be made in relation to the PLA-MNH group supervisors. This presentation is split into 4 sections. First, we'll explore the 7 key decisions regarding the program supervisors that need to be made when planning a PLA-MNH group program. Next, we'll consider the recommendations to keep in mind when making these 7 decisions. Then we'll cover what to do next after reviewing this presentation. And finally, we'll also give you some guidance on how to get answers to any questions you might have. So let's look first at the critical decisions that need to be made when planning the PLA-MNH group program supervisors. We call this the PLA-MNH group program planning pyramid. This pyramid offers a snapshot of the key components of a PLA-MNH group program. These 8 components have been extensively researched and refined over the last 20 years. These experiences have helped to identify 31 key decisions across these components that need to be made when planning a PLA-MNH group program. Each decision is supported by a recommendation that has been extensively developed, tested, and refined in over 13 countries. Planning a PLA-MNH group program so that the components are aligned to these recommendations can maximize the chance of success, that the PLA-MNH group program enables mothers and newborns to survive and thrive. In this chapter, we will consider the supervisors in the PLA-MNH group program. To plan this component, 7 key decisions need to be made. Decision 18, who will be the PLA-MNH group supervisors? Decision 19, how many PLA-MNH group supervisors will be selected? Decision 20, how will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be selected and trained? Decision 21, how will the PLA-MNH group supervisors observe PLA-MNH group meetings? Decision 22, how will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be supported to learn from each other? Decision 23, how will the PLA-MNH group supervisors travel to observe PLA-MNH group meetings? And finally, decision 24, how will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be incentivized in their role? Several studies have highlighted the importance of strong supervision to the success and sustainability of the PLA-MNH group approach. To be most effective, PLA-MNH group facilitators should be held accountable for performing the task and receive positive reinforcement from supervisors and peers for performing, and negative reinforcement and support when not performing. For example, in Nepal, Sondal and colleagues found that an effective system needs to be in place to monitor and evaluate the work of the facilitators. Without incentives, and critically, also adequate continued support and supervision, only 50% of PLA-MNH groups continued to be run by the original facilitators after the program ended. In the other 50% of groups, the facilitator either had to turn over or the groups had disbanded. As a result, the 7 decisions related to the PLA-MNH group program supervisors are influenced by 7 recommendations drawn from their experience and evidence base around the approach. Let us turn our attention to the first decision, decision 18. Who will be the PLA-MNH group supervisors? The recommendation states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should be well placed to support facilitators and groups to act on maternal and newborn health issues. Key characteristics of good supervisors include: first, that they are knowledgeable about maternal and newborn health and experienced in community mobilization. Second, they should either be based in and or delivering work in local communities. The best supervisors are familiar faces, working hard day to day in local communities and helping them address their maternal and newborn health issues. For those who live in local communities, this can be an easier task. For those based outside the community, then they tend to spend a lot of time traveling. Finally, the best supervisors should already be embedded in local health structures. For example, they should be supported, paid by, and affiliated to the local public or private health system. Where this is not the case at the beginning of a program, then a clear plan must be in place from the very start to ensure that this role is handed over and embedded in the health system by the end of the program. Considering this recommendation, let's further build up the common PLA-MNH team organograms that we see in our programs. You may remember from the previous presentation, presentation 7.1, that PLA-MNH group facilitators often come from one of three groups: either local women, or community health volunteers, or CHVs for short, or community health workers, or CHWs for short. Well, PLA-MNH group supervisors are also commonly selected from three groups. The first is CHWs again, where they have not been engaged as PLA-MNH group facilitators. For clarity, it might be helpful to remind ourselves of the definition of CHWs used in this course. CHWs are members of the communities where they work, are answerable to the communities for their activities, and are supported by the public health system. CHWs are paid by and affiliated with this health system, for example through training and supervision. CHWs are often good supervisors if the PLA-MNH group facilitators are local women or CHVs. CHWs are a particularly good choice as their remit almost always already includes some role in organising groups for health education, demand generation and community mobilisation. However, CHVs and CHWs are often not adequately trained and supported to use the community mobilisation tools they are given, and the tools themselves are often not evidence-based, effective or sustainable. In this context, PLA-MNH groups are not an additional responsibility for the CHWs. They do not add to their workload. Indeed, they can actually make their jobs easier. Selecting and training CHWs as supervisors in the PLA-MNH group program can give them an excellent tool to add to their toolboxes and also a team of facilitators to deliver it, helping them to deliver their existing responsibilities more easily and effectively. A good example here is from one of our programs with the Mikanda Trust in Salima District, Malawi, where the facilitators were local women and the supervisors were HSAs, or Health Surveillance Assistants, the Malawian CHW cadre. Existing CHV or CHW supervisors are also excellent PLA-MNH group supervisors. Clearly, they are the best choice when PLA-MNH group facilitators are CHVs or CHWs. They will already have a role in their supervision. Part of this role will likely include supporting them to organise groups for health education, demand generation and community mobilisation. Supervising these activities is thus already often part of their existing responsibility. In this context, PLA-MNH group supervision is again not an additional responsibility for CHV or CHW supervisors. It does not add to their workload. Indeed, as discussed, when CHWs are supervisors, it can actually make their jobs easier. A good example is from our program with the Family Guidance Association of Ethiopia, where the PLA-MNH group facilitators were Health Development Army leaders, or HDAs for short, the cadre of CHV in Ethiopia. In this setting, the supervisors were health extension workers, or HEWs for short, a cadre of health staff sitting at health post level and responsible for supporting and supervising the HDAs in their facility catchment populations. National policy in Ethiopia dictates that 2 HEWs sit at each health post, one focused on facility-based activities and one focused on community-based activities. The HEW focuses on community-based activities, supervises the HDAs, and travels regularly to support them and other community-based health promotion activities. The final group that is often selected is NGO staff at an officer level or equivalent. They can make very effective supervisors, particularly when the PLA-MNH group facilitators are local women, but also if they are CHVs or CHWs, as long as the national policies allow this structure. However, it is critically important to consider embedding, so planning to use CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors where possible from the beginning of a new program. However, where NGO officers are best placed to take on the role and are selected as PLA-MNH group supervisors, then plans must be put in place to transfer responsibility to others embedded in the health system by the end of the program. One common approach to support this phased embedding is a dual supervision system. In this case, at the beginning of the program, the NGO officers are selected, trained and engaged as primary supervisors, working directly with the PLA-MNH group facilitators in their catchment areas. However, also from the very beginning of the program, secondary supervisors are selected from one of the embedded groups, for example from CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors. These secondary supervisors then shadow the NGO officers in their role. Then, over the program lifetime, the NGO officers build their capacities of the CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors at the same time as handing over more and more responsibility in relation to supervision. This means that by the end of the program, the roles are reversed. The CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors become the primary PLA-MNH group supervisors as the NGO officers phase out. A good example is from a program with the Mikanda Trust in Nkota Kota District, Malawi. In this case, Mikanda Trust officers were selected, trained and engaged as primary PLA-MNH group supervisors at the beginning of the program. They worked directly with the PLA-MNH group facilitators, which in this case were local women. However, from the beginning of the program, they also worked very closely with health surveillance assistants, or HSAs for short. HSAs are the community health workers operating in local communities in Malawi. These HSAs were selected as secondary PLA-MNH group supervisors at the same time that the NGO officers were selected. Over the course of the program, they met regularly, and the NGO officers took the HSAs to visit groups and invited them to attend meetings, gradually building their capacities to take on the supervisory role. Then in the final third of the program, the HSAs were provided a formal, in-depth training in the PLA-MNH group approach and roles and responsibilities of primary supervisors. And this meant that by the end of the program, when they were officially given responsibility to be primary PLA-MNH group supervisors, they were ready and raring to go. This left the HSAs as the primary supervisors, and the NGO officers were able to phase out of the district, knowing that the PLA-MNH group facilitators and PLA-MNH groups were in good hands. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam district, Uganda. Here, the partner selected Senior Village Health Teams, or VHTs, as supervisors. VHTs are the Ugandan equivalent of community health volunteers. Senior VHTs lead a team of VHTs in a health centre catchment area. They have a particular role in organising monthly meetings. A previous program in Uganda, in the nearby Gulu district, had engaged VHTs as PLA-MNH group facilitators. The VHTs in this other program struggled to carry out their PLA-MNH group duties effectively due to their high workload, exacerbated by a number of national health campaigns that took place during the program lifetime. As a result, in this program, the partner decided to engage local women as PLA-MNH group facilitators instead. However, VHTs are perfectly placed to act as PLA-MNH group supervisors, leveraging their position embedded in the health system and role in relation to community mobilization, but asking far less of their time than if they were engaged as facilitators. As a result, senior VHTs were engaged as PLA-MNH group supervisors in this program. Now, let us turn our attention to decision 19. How many PLA-MNH group supervisors will be selected? The recommendation here is split between PLA-MNH group supervisors who are embedded in the health system, for example, CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors, and those from NGOs. For the former group, the recommendation states that where PLA-MNH group supervisors are embedded in the health system, they should be responsible for as few PLA-MNH group facilitators as possible, and a maximum of approximately 12 each. So how can we decide how many PLA-MNH group facilitators each supervisor should support? Well, let's return to the diagram from Chapter 4. Imagine this is a district and has been defined as the PLA-MNH group program area. Imagine the divisions in the district are health facility catchment areas. Some have been excluded because they are predominantly urban and meet few of the criteria for inclusion in the program. These health facility catchment areas can be subdivided into administrative units. Groups can then be allocated across these administrative units. And groups can also be allocated to PLA-MNH groups facilitators by referring to the number of groups that fall within each of the facilitator-defined catchment areas. Well, facilitators can be allocated to supervisors in exactly the same way. CHWs, or CHV or CHW supervisors, or NGO officers will all have well-defined catchment areas. For example, HSAs, the Community Health Worker Cadre in Malawi, have a catchment area of approximately 2,500 people. This is commonly a segment of the population within one health facility catchment area, because health facility catchment areas are often larger than this. Where PLA-MNH group supervisors are HSAs, they can be allocated the PLA-MNH group facilitators that fall within this catchment area. In this way, in our previous example from Salima District, Malawi, where HSAs were the PLA-MNH group supervisors, the HSAs were each responsible for the 5 PLA-MNH group facilitators in their catchment areas. CHV and CHW supervisors will have a larger catchment area than CHWs. For example, HEWs, the Community Health Volunteer Supervisors in Ethiopia, have a catchment area the same as the health post at which they are based. This is usually about 5,000 people. Where PLA-MNH group supervisors are HEWs, they can be allocated the PLA-MNH group facilitators that fall within this catchment area. In this way, in our previous example from Malga Warada in Ethiopia, where HEWs were the PLA-MNH group supervisors, the HEWs were each responsible for the 10 PLA-MNH group facilitators in their catchment areas. As mentioned, the recommendation here is split between PLA-MNH group supervisors who are embedded in the health system, for example, CHWs or CHV and CHW supervisors, and those from NGOs. For the latter group, the recommendation states, where PLA-MNH group supervisors are NGO staff, they should be responsible for a maximum of 50 PLA-MNH group facilitators each. This will vary greatly between NGOs, so it is not one size fits all, but NGO officers are likely to have the largest catchment area of all. For example, the 2 community mobilization officers, the NGO supervisors recruited by Maikanda Trust in our Nkota district example, had a catchment area that overlapped with several health facility catchment areas. This worked out to a population of approximately 80,000 people each. Where PLA-MNH group supervisors are NGO officers, they will be allocated the PLA-MNH group facilitators that fall within this catchment area. In this way, in our previous example from Nkota district, Malawi, where the 2 Maikanda community mobilization officers were the PLA-MNH group supervisors, they were each responsible for the 35 PLA-MNH group facilitators in their catchment areas. This table shows data on the original 7 trials of the PLA-MNH group approach conducted in Bangladesh, India, Malawi and Nepal between 1999 and 2013. In all 7 programs, the partner NGOs recruited and paid full-time salaries for PLA-MNH group supervisors. In these programs, the ratios were relatively low. The PLA-MNH group supervisors were responsible for between 2.4 and 9 facilitators each. Furthermore, this equated to a total of between 22 and 122 PLA-MNH groups falling into the catchment areas of these supervisors. As presented previously, where NGO officers are engaged as PLA-MNH group supervisors, the aim should be to hand over the responsibility to embedded supervisors by the end of the program. As a result, two ratios must be kept in mind in these cases. The primary and secondary PLA-MNH group supervisors must both have a ratio of PLA-MNH group facilitators that matches the recommendation, a maximum of approximately 50 for the primary NGO supervisors and 12 for the secondary embedded supervisors. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam district, Uganda. 7 PLA-MNH group supervisors were selected, one from the catchment area in each of the 7 health centres in the program area. As a result, each PLA-MNH group supervisor was responsible for about 14 PLA-MNH group facilitators each. You will see that this is slightly above the maximum recommended ratio of 12 PLA-MNH group facilitators per PLA-MNH group supervisor. This is a function of the size of the senior VHT catchment areas. Despite this discrepancy, the partner felt that this ratio was still acceptable. Now let's look at decision 20. How will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be selected and trained? The recommendation states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should be selected in close collaboration with local stakeholders. But who are these stakeholders? Well, whether supervisors are CHWs or existing CHV or CHW supervisors, there may be only one potential candidate in each area. In these cases, it is important to involve health system and community level stakeholders to confirm the individual in the role, rather than to select an individual to fill the role. Whether supervisors are NGO officers, it is important to conduct an official recruitment process and to consult and involve health system and community stakeholders in the process. For example, they can be involved in developing the job description and person specification, and/or in the actual recruitment panel. The recommendation here has a second part in relation to training of PLA-MNH group facilitators. The recommendation states that once recruited, they should receive an initial 9-day training and 4 days of refresher training within 1 year of the initial training. PLA-MNH group training is a cascade training system, so the PLA-MNH group supervisor training is commonly led by the PLA-MNH group managers. However, it is also possible for the training to be delivered by national or district trainers. The 9-day initial training covers 1 day on a general introduction to the PLA-MNH group approach, 1 day on PLA-MNH group supervision roles and responsibilities, 1 day on facilitation skills, 1 day on maternal and newborn health knowledge. Here it's important to note that PLA-MNH group supervisors will be selected on the basis of existing maternal and newborn health knowledge. As a result, in some cases, this can be a much smaller component of the training. And 4 days on facilitating the PLA-MNH group cycle. And finally, 1 final day on reporting. The length of the training may mean it is necessary to divide it into blocks, particularly when working with CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors, to ensure that their work is not overly disrupted. To a large extent, the content of the refresher training is dictated by the needs that arise during implementation of the approach in the previous period. However, the 4 days usually include 3 days to recap on the content of the initial training, and 1 day to provide coaching on any specific common challenges identified by the facilitators and supervisors that arose during the implementation in the previous period. A refresher training within 1 year of the initial training is very helpful to reinforce learning, fill any gaps, and help to overcome any challenges. After that, annual refresher training can be helpful, particularly at the beginning of new programs, but is not mandatory. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam district, Uganda. The PLA-MNH group supervisors were selected by the partner in collaboration with local communities and health system stakeholders. Since there was only one senior VHT in each health facility catchment area, the stakeholders had to select all of them, and as a result their role was to confirm them in the role of PLA-MNH group supervisors rather than to select them for the role. Once confirmed, the PLA-MNH group supervisors received a 9-day initial training, a 4-day refresher training 1 year later, and a final refresher training the year after that. These trainings were delivered by the PLA-MNH group manager at a central location in the district. Now let's look at decision 21. How will the PLA-MNH group supervisors observe PLA-MNH group meetings? Here, the recommendation states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should observe each of their facilitators in action once per month, but at least quarterly. This recommendation matches with the previous one on the number of PLA-MNH group facilitators per supervisor. How? Well, if we imagine that there are 20 working days in a month, where the PLA-MNH group supervisors are embedded in the health system, the previous recommendation states that they should be responsible for a maximum of 12 PLA-MNH group facilitators each. This means that even if they have the maximum of 12 facilitators, they can feasibly observe each one every month and still have time for other non-community mobilization duties. Clearly, at a lower ratio of facilitators to supervisors, observing all their facilitators in 1 month is even more feasible. Hence the focus on the previous recommendation on PLA-MNH group supervisors being responsible for as few PLA-MNH group facilitators as possible. Alternatively, at the maximum ratio of 1 PLA-MNH group supervisor to 12 PLA-MNH group facilitators, and with a high workload beyond community mobilization, then they can feasibly observe 1 facilitator per week over 3 months, 1 quarter, leaving adequate time for their other duties. Even for the NGO supervisors at a maximum of 50 facilitators each, they could still manage to observe all their facilitators across a quarter, leaving some time for other duties. Clearly, in this scenario, the PLA-MNH group supervisors would need to be employed exclusively to supervise the PLA-MNH group facilitators, with few, if any, other duties. In all these cases, we are talking about observing PLA-MNH group facilitators, not PLA-MNH groups. However, PLA-MNH group facilitators will often be responsible for several groups each. Where possible, PLA-MNH group supervisors should rotate which groups they observe every month or quarter to ensure that all or as many PLA-MNH groups as possible are visited by the end of the program. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam district, Uganda. Here, the PLA-MNH group supervisors each observed 1 facilitator in action per week. This meant that they were able to observe almost all the facilitators in their catchment areas every quarter. Remember, they had 14 facilitators each. By rotating the groups they observed, this also meant they were able to observe almost all the PLA-MNH groups in their catchment areas every 6 months, and most of their groups twice per year. Decision 22. How will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be supported to learn from each other? The recommendation here states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should be brought together regularly, preferably monthly, but at least quarterly, to share experiences and learn from each other. Bringing PLA-MNH group supervisors together on a regular basis to learn from each other has been shown time and again to be a very effective way to maintain the quality of PLA-MNH group implementation. Experience suggests that monthly meetings are best, but should take place at least quarterly. It is also possible to gradually reduce the frequency of the meetings, as they are most important at the early stages of implementation, when the PLA-MNH group supervisors are still gaining experience. Peer learning meetings, coordinated by the PLA-MNH group managers, are also an opportunity for the managers to provide coaching and advice to support implementation. It may not be necessary to schedule additional meetings. Often, the PLA-MNH group supervisors, particularly where they are CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors, will be coming together with their managers on a regular basis anyway. In these cases, peer learning can be added as an additional item on the agendas of these meetings. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam District, Uganda. Here, the PLA-MNH group managers coordinated one peer learning session per month. The peer learning sessions took place at a central location in the district. Let's now turn our attention to Decision 23. How will the PLA-MNH group supervisors travel to observe PLA-MNH group meetings? The recommendation here states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should have the capacity to reach most of the groups in a catchment area in a maximum of approximately 1 hour. Once again, this recommendation assumes that observing a group should take an absolute maximum of about 7 hours. 1 hour to get to the group, 2 hours to observe the meeting, 2 hours to provide leeway in the event of any delays, 1 hour to get back home, and a final hour to complete any reporting requirements. Where supervisors are CHWs, this may be possible on foot. But more likely, in all cases, this will either be using work transport, for example, a bicycle, motorcycle, or vehicle provided by their employers, or an allowance, so they can use public transport that is available locally. As mentioned before, for CHWs and CHV or CHW supervisors, supervising PLA-MNH groups is not an additional activity. They should already have support to get to their communities to perform their duties, including around community mobilization. However, this is not always the case. It is important that any additional support provided for CHWs and CHW or CHV supervisors will need to be in line with local policies regarding resources and allowances for these cadres. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam District, Uganda. Although quite densely populated, the average distances for supervisors to reach most of their groups was over 1 hour on foot. This is because their catchment areas are quite large and because Oyam has a number of topographical barriers which make travelling challenging. The partner conducted a cost-benefit analysis looking at different options to support PLA-MNH group supervisors to travel to conduct their observations. On balance, public transport made the most sense in this setting. Public transport options are very available and also cost-effective. As a result, the PLA-MNH group supervisors were provided with a monthly allowance to use these public transport options to conduct their observations. This allowance was in line with local policies. Finally, let's turn our attention to the last decision in this component, Decision 24. How will the PLA-MNH group supervisors be incentivized in their role? Here, the recommendation states that PLA-MNH group supervisors should receive sufficient tangible incentives to motivate them to perform their role, in addition to the social and moral incentives they gain from performing it. The means, motives, opportunities framework was discussed in the previous presentation, presentation 7.1. As a quick reminder, the framework is used to highlight the determinants of CHW and CHV performance and is particularly relevant here. It posits that performance is dictated by 3 interdependent and interacting domains. Means, in other words, is the individual capable of performing the task? Motives, in other words, does the individual want to perform the task? And opportunities, in other words, does the individual have the chance to perform the task? Decisions regarding who will be PLA-MNH group supervisors, their supervisory ratios, how they will be selected and trained, how they will engage in peer learning, and their transport options help to maximize the potential that PLA-MNH group supervisors have the means and opportunity to perform their tasks. The final dimension, motives, is where incentives can become relevant. There are a range of options when it comes to incentivizing PLA-MNH group supervisors. They can receive a salary, or financial incentives, or non-financial incentives, or a package that combines these different options? Let's consider each option in turn. Starting with salaries. If PLA-MNH group supervisors are CHWs, or CHV or CHW supervisors, then they may already have a salary for their role. Their role will likely include some aspect of community mobilization, and as a result, they may not require a specific PLA-MNH group salary to be provided. Their existing salary could be sufficient. However, where PLA-MNH group supervisors are NGO officers, then they will require a salary to be provided. For example, in our program in Freetown, Sierra Leone, our partner, the Wellbody Foundation, recruited and paid 2 full-time salaries for women's group coordinators. Each coordinator was responsible for between 22 and 23 PLA-MNH group facilitators each. Assuming observing one facilitator takes approximately 7 hours, then this equated to approximately 155 hours to observe all their facilitators once. This workload is not possible in 1 month, which consists of approximately 140 work hours. So the supervisors observed each facilitator once per quarter, giving them plenty of time to do this effectively and also engage in their other work duties. Now let's consider financial incentives. It may be appropriate to provide PLA-MNH group supervisors with performance-linked financial incentives. Or the incentives may be uncoupled from their performance. In both cases, once again, any additional support provided to CHWs or CHV and CHW supervisors will need to be in line with local policies regarding resources and allowances for these cadres. Finally, let's consider non-financial incentives. When considering non-financial incentives, best practice is to consult the selected PLA-MNH group supervisors to find out what form of incentive they would value most. It is possible to make these incentives role-linked. In other words, they're an incentive for the PLA-MNH group supervisors that also helps them in their role. For example, in some programs, PLA-MNH group supervisors have received airtime, and in most, they've received a quote-unquote uniform of t-shirt, hat, and bag. But these incentives can also be unlinked to their role. In either case, once again, any additional support provided to CHWs or CHV or CHW supervisors will need to be in line with local policies regarding resources and allowances for these cadres. Let's revisit our real-world example of a PLA-MNH group program in Oyam District, Uganda, one last time. National policy did not allow the partner to provide the senior VHTs with a salary, so this was discounted as an option. Furthermore, policy also did not allow for the partner to provide financial incentives, as the senior VHTs were already financially incentivized by the health system. However, despite PLA-MNH groups not being an additional duty, since senior VHTs are already engaged in community mobilization activities with groups, the partner felt it was important to provide them with a role-linked, non-financial incentive to ensure they remained motivated. This was in line with national policy, so the partner consulted with the PLA-MNH group supervisors about the non-financial incentives that they would find most valuable. The PLA-MNH group supervisors identified airtime to be ideal. They were also provided with a t-shirt, hat and bag to facilitate their duties. So what should you do now that you have reviewed this presentation? First, we recommend that you update the Module 2 Progress Tracker. Second, we encourage you to plan your PLA-MNH group program by doing exercise 7.2. Finally, we encourage you to review presentation 7.3 to explore how to plan for the PLA-MNH group manager cadre. At the end of this presentation, you may now have some questions. If so, please don't hesitate to contact us by email or phone. One of the team will be happy to help. Enjoy the course.